Well, hello everyone and welcome. We're very excited to be bringing this webinar titled Promoting the Profession by Aligning Educational Program Titles to the Medical Laboratory Science Career. This webinar is sponsored by ASCLS, ASCP, the ASCP Board of Certification, and NACLS. We have a great lineup of speakers for you today. The webinar will be presented in 4 segments. So first, we'll hear from Drs. Linda Smith and Kathy Doig from ASCLS on the history of our nomenclature and why our professional title and credentials are important. Next, we'll focus on the process of changing a program and degree name from CLS to MLS with the talk from Dr. Rodney Rohde, a program director. Susan Johnson will tell us about the work of the Nomenclature Task Force and what the Board of Certification is doing with respect to credentials. Marissa James will wrap up the presentations with the perspective from NACLS. Following the presentations, we'll take questions from the audience, and these can be entered with the Q&A function. And at the conclusion of this session, I'll provide you with a PACE code and directions on how you can claim credit. So please stay tuned. All right, our first speakers, Dr. Kathy Doig is a member at large of the ASCP Board of Certification Nomenclature Task Force, a former NACLS program director, former exam council chair, and president of the National Credentialing Agency for Laboratory Personnel. So that was the NCA, and she's a 15-year member of ASCLS. Dr. Linda Smith is a member of the ASCP Board of Certification Nomenclature Task Force as well. She's a former department chair of an MLS program, former ASCLS president, and former NCA exam council chair. Their talk is entitled, When Educators Do It Right, Students Get It Right, the critical role of educators in standardizing the MLS title. Linda and Kathy, welcome.
Thank you, Susan. I'm Kathy Doig, and today Dr. Linda Smith and I will offer an overview of the rationale for standardizing the MLS title and the critical role that educators play in this. Because when educators do it right, students will too. So here are the objectives for the presentation, and the last one is the most important. You should take away from this some practical strategies that you can use to promote the adoption of the MLS title profession-wide. Next. The rationale for adopting the medical laboratory scientist title has been reviewed in the joint position paper from ASCLS and the ASCP Board of Registry, or pardon me, Board of Certification. And then we will summarize that later. But this slide demonstrates a main point, and that is that medical technology does not mean what it did when our profession was founded. Our professional title has been usurped by the medical device industry and now has an entirely different meaning. And as a result, we have lost name recognition. Is it any wonder that no one knows what we do or who we are? Next. While official credential titles change over time, earlier titles persist in common usage for an extended period of time, and it seems impossible to get rid of the old usage. Here we're looking at a chart which is just the MLS equivalent credentials through the years, and you can see at the top of the chart the time frames in which credentials have existed. Laboratory technician here is not equivalent to the MLT of today. It was the first Board of Registry designation. And it was difficult in the 1930s and onward to persuade people to use medical technologist instead of laboratory technician. And we face a similar challenge today. Remember, the CLS credential was retired in 2014 when the National Credentialing Agency merged with the ASCP Board of Registry to form the Board of Certification. And yet, CLS usage persists today. In fact, there are more CLS program titles than MT at this point. But this contributes to confusion for the public, for prospective students, and for other health professionals, and it exacerbates the loss of name recognition, which is diminishing our profession. Let me add that our casual names diminish us further. Lab tech, med tech, bench tech, or just tech. We each need to retire these from our vernacular. But why do people persist in using old titles? Next slide. We tried to anticipate things you might have said if you are still using an old title. And while these are understandable reasons, the larger need to promote the profession and dignify it with a unique title is of greater importance than any of these. If Linda and I, both former members of the board of directors of NCA, can get on board with using the new terminology, we think everyone should be able to do it. It's critical that we advance the standardization process without further delay. So now I'm going to turn it over to Linda to talk about the importance of educators in the standardization process.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Kathy. Educators do have a special role in advancing the standardization of nomenclature to medical laboratory scientists. We know our professional identity begins its formation and development, which is referred to as our professional socialization, with us during the educational process. And yet this continues throughout our careers based on our interaction with peers and other healthcare professionals. As you read this slide, keep in mind that the literature reports a growing focus on professional identity development in medical, dental, nursing, pharmacy, and other non-medical professions. It is, however, a separate concept from professionalism, and some authors consider it to be the foundation for professionalism, which we teach our students. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, professional identity is influenced by multiple factors, as you can see in this graphic. Note the circular structure of the graphic, and especially the bottom two quadrants. I consider this a chicken and egg scenario. We know that professional identity is how we perceive ourselves within our occupational context. So what we call ourselves influences what we think of ourselves and affects what we project to others. The cycle then turns around with the perception of others affecting how we perceive ourselves. Next slide, please. So, if what we call ourselves influences what we think of ourselves and what others think of us, then our credential titles substantially underpin and sustain our professional identity. They are powerful. And it's why it is so important that we have alignment of our profession's name, program names, our occupational title, our credential title, and what we call ourselves. Next slide, please. So why does professional identity matter? The literature suggests that those with a strong professional identity are more likely to be committed to their profession and career. They demonstrate values, attitudes, and behaviors expected of their professional, and that in this case is medical laboratory science. They have increased job satisfaction, and they have high performance standards. These traits in turn ultimately translate to a longer retention in the profession. And we know retention in our profession is a problem that we have been grappling with for years. Next slide, please. So in the end, people will call us what we ask them or tell them to call us. And we all need to be using the same title if we are to claim our individual and collective professional identity. Next slide, please. So we have been talking about our lack of identity for years. Kathy noted earlier how many different names we've had, and we all have heard this. Nobody knows who we are. So To promote a single professional title and support professional identity development, the ASCP Board of Certification and the ASCLS House of Delegates adopted this position paper. It represents a common voice, that of our professional organization and our credentialing organization. And I'm hopeful that we're going to be adding our accrediting organization's voice in the near future. A unified designation, one, gives us recognition of the profession, and two, perhaps more importantly, cements a professional identity through our name. So we and all others call us with one name. Now, note, going back to something that Kathy said too, the BS level is all that's included in this because our MLT nomenclature is pretty standardized and very well recognized. Next slide, please. This slide shows some key positions in the paper related to adopting this professional nomenclature. These actions are both short and long term, and it focuses on actions that individuals and organizations, educational and workplace alike, can take to get this job done. I'm going to turn it back to Kathy, who's going to talk about some very specific actions that educators can take to begin and continue this process.
Thank you, Linda. So, as the title of the presentation said, if educators do this right, then students will get it right. And they will carry the correct terminology with them into their careers as a habit. The ratio of teachers to students means that your impact will be amplified in promoting the adoption of proper terminology. So what do you need to do? Here's the slide that refers to that third objective that I pointed out at the beginning. These are some practical strategies that you can use to promote the adoption of the proper terminology. You can work through the necessary channels to correct program and major titles. And as Susan mentioned, Dr. Rohde will be talking particularly about this in a minute. You can use MLS terminology inside and outside of the classroom and eliminate any of those casual names from your conversations. Always use your proper MLS credential. Now, remember, ASCP Board of Certification changed all MT credentials to MLS in late 2022. So display it proudly in your syllabus, your course materials, your curriculum vitae, and any signature lines. You can update printed and web-based recruitment and course materials. I'm going to say a little bit more about this in a minute. You can coordinate with your institutional HR department to correct job titles for which you hire. And you can help your clinical sites and the instructors there to model proper nomenclature with the students, though you may need to do some continuing ed for them on this topic to accomplish that. So let's go back to the idea of updating printed and web-based recruitment and course materials. Next slide. I suspect that everyone has something like this in your recruitment materials, whether it's printed or online, that talks about the profession. So while the clinical laboratory science program at City Hospital works through the administrative process to change the program name, they don't need to wait until that is complete before they update terminology. They can change the references from clinical laboratory science and clinical laboratory scientists to, next slide, medical laboratory science and medical laboratory scientists. So these kinds of changes are not dependent on finalizing a program title change. Next slide. So Linda and I cannot emphasize how important it is to adopt I'm sorry, let me start over. We can't emphasize enough how important it is to adopt MLS as our only professional title and how critical educators are to the process. We have briefly described how our professional organizations have developed a position paper on our professional nomenclature. We described how adopting the title of MLS cements our professional identity, helps with recognition by other healthcare professionals and the public, and in turn may help with recruitment and retention. As educators, if you implement these suggestions, the proper terminology is going to be adopted profession-wide much more rapidly. So now we'll turn it back to Susan.
Thank you, Kathy and Linda, for that very thorough and thought-provoking talk. So I realize I didn't introduce myself as your moderator when we began this program. So I'm Susan Harrington, and I'm here because I'm chair of the ASCP Workforce Steering Committee, and I'm also a member of the Nomenclature Task Force of the ASCP. So our next speaker is Dr. Rodney Rohde, and he'll talk about his experience in promoting the professional title by his experience in aligning his program to the medical laboratory science title. So Dr. Rohde is a Regents Professor at the Texas State University system and a university distinguished chair and professor of the Clinical Laboratory Science program. He is the associate director of the Translational Health Research Initiative and past president of the Texas Association of Clinical Laboratory Science. He is a distinguished speaker, and if you haven't heard him speak, maybe you have read one of his tweets, as he is an active advocate for the profession on Twitter. Dr. Rohde, welcome.
Thank you so much, Susan, and welcome everybody to our really critical webinar today. It's an honor and a privilege to join you today from Texas, and I know some of you are in the AM and others of you in the PM, so thank you for taking this time to discuss this really critical topic. Next slide, please. And you can move through that too, since we've had introductions. Thank you. So really what I am going to speak with you about is my journey. And I'll talk a little bit about how that began in a moment, but I do want to mention that back in May of 2021, the Blueprint for Action was put out and this process was started. And I was very fortunate and honored to join that cause and am now leading a subcommittee on this actual effort that I'll be talking about you today, as well as the overall effort. Next slide. That blueprint, if you haven't accessed it at the website, I absolutely would encourage you to check that out. There is just a ton of great information for you to look at and synthesize as you think about this process. It's a nice starting point to think about these 12 recommendations, and I'm not going to read these to you, but certainly you can see that these recommendations are integrated and coordinated in a way that we hope will move this effort forward, everything from encouraging interest at the lower levels of education all the way out to securing funding to secure this actual recommendation blueprint. Next slide. The blueprint also has 3 primary focus areas, and if you think about those 12 recommendations, you'll understand that they really do fall within these 3 primary focus areas. And really the area that my subcommittee and others are focused on is this visibility issue. Next slide. Okay, so here's my journey. And really I want to talk about this from the standpoint of telling you just briefly. Many of you who know who I am know my story, but if you haven't met me, let me give you just a minute or so of my story. So when I came to college, I was, like many people, thinking science and pre-med and really didn't have any awareness of this major nor the profession. And so I went through the typical coursework and I took my first medical microbiology course in the Department of Biology and fell in love with infectious diseases, as well as the overall field of microbiology. And so I thought, hey, this is it for me, and I will end up working in healthcare. And so I moved along and received my bachelor's of science in microbiology. And I liked it so much, I decided to stay a little longer, and I picked up a master's of science in virology. And so for about 7 years, I was rocking along doing those things in the school and the College of Biology. I did not know that across the street from my very college was the College of Health Professions, and they had something called clinical lab science in that major name. And so you can understand this is really personal to me, because when I graduated with 2 degrees and went to apply in hospitals, I couldn't get a job. And it was because of that lack of credentials. So a long story short, I moved into the public health sector and started learning about, as Kathy and Linda mentioned, these titles called medical technologist, and started looking into that and realized, hey, there are routes to get there. So I ended up kind of backdooring it through a working route. And in 2002, I came back into academia, and lo and behold, I moved into the actual clinical laboratory science program, which I never knew existed. And now I'm chair of that program. So I'm very passionate about getting this education out there. There's a critical need for raising this visibility at all levels, not just in middle school and high school, but also at the early college level, because many people come in and do not even know the actual major name. That's been an emphasis of things I've been doing lately. So not only does that personal journey inform me about this need, but at this point in my career, after 30 plus years of working both in public health as well as in education and academic settings, I've taught probably over thousands, I know I have, over thousands of students at both the community college level. I'm an adjunct professor at Austin Community College, as well as at Texas State in a 4-year degree environment. And so many of these students that we teach, especially as you run into these individuals at the freshman, whether it's community colleges or bachelor's level or in high school, they just simply don't know the name of our college major. So I'm going to make that emphasis right now for everyone listening. When you're talking about this title, remember that the college major needs to be stated over and over again so that individuals know, perhaps I love microbiology, but if they want to work in the medical laboratory, they need to know medical laboratory science. When they do find the information, sometimes it's, they can't find it easily, or it's confusing. As Linda and Kathy talked about, we have a commitment to that at the leadership and membership level. And so we're working on that. And often they don't understand the difference between a degree in biology, for example, or chemistry, or STEM, or pre-med, or other types of biological science degrees. So again, I can't emphasize here today the importance of talking about the major as well as the profession. Next slide. So this is a overview, kind of the 10,000-foot overview. And I want to thank Linda and Kathy for helping put this together with me after they went through my process at my level. And I don't want to speak a ton about this right now, but I'll come back to it as a resource that I hope you'll utilize. So certainly this doesn't happen overnight. And for me, that left upper quadrant of collecting data and information is critical for everyone to understand those position papers, to understand the NAACLS data, to understand your own institutional process. I became a chair of this program in 2013, and I had wonderful mentors. Dave Fleur was the former chair, people like Linda, Sherilyn McKenzie, and just so many others, Kathy, people from all over the country that were very instrumental in me learning and understanding this name. And then certainly you move through your support for change that gets into your program and your administrators. And then you go into the process, right, of following and initiating institutional procedures. That can mean a lot of different things for different universities. And then finally, setting that timeline, assigning responsibilities, and seeing it through. And so I'm going to share this journey with you now. Next slide, please. So I mentioned briefly a minute ago that I really had started this step one of discussing this with faculty, and including within my college, my dean, other program chairs, and even with my provost, really months before the summer of 2022. I'm just putting this as my starting point because this is where the blueprint for action really kind of the rubber met the road for me. And I said, okay, it's time to get this done. And remember, I became a chair in 2013, and we considered this a few years ago, but we were just kind of waiting for, more programs to do it, as well as some other reasons for just internal staff changing and faculty retiring and things like that. So we did a lot of that within our own program over last summer. And then in late summer of 22, I talked with my associate dean of academic affairs. Now, this is within our own college, so I'm going to kind of explain. We're in a state institution in Texas. We are a bachelor's and graduate level degree promoting institution all the way up through the PhD. And so we sometimes have associate deans within our colleges. And so I notified that person, and then that associate dean informed my dean, who then informed our upper administration. And for us, that typically is interacting with the provost office. And certainly right above that is the presidential cabinet. So that's kind of how our levels of governance work in a state institution. And the first thing my dean told me in early to mid to late summer, rather, of 2022, was we're going to need a paper. We're going to need a small 1 to 2 page proposal that concisely talks about why you need this, right? And how many programs around the country have actually made this change? And if possible, can you tell me where some of those programs were located in the United States? So over the next couple, 3 slides, I'm going to show you my proposal. And I've cut it down a little bit so it's not massively wordy. Remember, this was about a 1.5 to 2 page document. And then I'll come back to kind of step 3, because part of this is really almost in sync with each other. So part of this was putting together this proposal, but we also at Texas State, we have to actually put in an official name change into something called our Program Inventory Management System. It's just an online portal. Everyone does this. If you want to change your name, whether it's CLS to MLS, or you want to change health informatics to health informatics management, whatever the situation is, you must start there after you kind of get this ball rolling. Next slide, please. So the next few slides, again, just to show you, I've kind of put bullets here. This was a 1.5 page kind of formal proposal. And so I'm just going to detail a couple of things. So the first thing I did was I made the request, that we're currently the Clinical Lab Science program and that we're requesting to change our name to the Medical Laboratory Science program. And then I took a paragraph or 2 to talk about who we are and what we do. And again, if some of you follow some of my writing and other speaking opportunities, I often use these statements and I use them with my students. It's kind of my calling part at this point, that we produce probably 14 billion, roughly, laboratory medical tests. We provide up to 2/3 of all major medical decisions used by physicians and others, from birth to death. And simply put, we are just, saving lives every day. And talked a little bit about COVID-19 for the benefit of our administration and how that impacted our workforce shortages across all environments in our country, and that we have started partnering across most professional laboratory organizations, hospital programs, university programs, and others to find immediate and long-term solutions. Next slide, please. I then talked a little bit about the ASCP blueprint for workforce action and that workforce steering committee that was created that Susan and our other speakers have talked about. And it was really the result of an in-depth medical laboratory workforce study conducted by University of Washington Center for Health and Workforce Studies and ASCP and others. And so I've already talked to you about those 12 recommendations, as well as those 3 focus areas. So that was included in the document. And then I specifically pointed out one of the low-hanging fruit items was found in AIM 1 recommendation 3B. Again, this is all found at that website resource. Next slide, please. So that recommendation states that we need to be conducting research on evidence-based practices and strategies by laboratory training programs that have either saved or have integrated coursework into their program to help them become indispensable to the institution, organization, or laboratory community. For example, changing the program name to medical laboratory science from clinical laboratory science. Or, for example, partnering with a vocational college to have a bridge program. By the way, we've been doing that as well with my own community college for years. And so many programs are starting to transition to MLS programs. Next slide, please. So getting to this was the very end of my proposal. I had a couple of tables, and this is a table that was pulled from the NACLS News annual survey. So you see the link down at the bottom there. And if you focus a little bit on MLS, you can notice this is 10 years of data from 2013 to 2022. And it shows, our program growth nationally from 221 up to 245. And you can also notice it shows MLT, the associate levels there, as well as other laboratory scientist classifications and programs. Next slide. And this was the last data point on my proposal. And this was really a look at kind of October of 2019 from the NACLS website and comparing that to the fall of 2022 when we were kind of rolling along here. And so you can see, especially if you look at across the program, this is the medical laboratory science programs, remember, educational programs. MLS in 2019 had about 61% nationally. And in 2022, we're now at roughly 67%. And that might be plus or minus a percentage point, depending on the data. And you can see that if you look out and you keep comparing that, that even with all of these efforts, we're still about 1/3 of the programs are either CLS or MedTech at this point in 2022. And that might be one plus or minus percentage point, depending on the current data. And then the MLT program is there. And as Kathy and Linda mentioned, you can see that one's moved along quite nicely. It's reached a 92% level, that associate's degree title change. Next slide, please. And this was the very final sentence of my proposal. So just pointing out what I just mentioned, that from that time period, there's been about a 6% increase in 1 year or so in the number of programs that we're now calling MLS. And so at the very end of my proposal, I restated the request to change the name of the program. And I also importantly wanted to make sure the administration understood I wanted to change our degree title, right? So that's an important point, not just the name of my program in the catalog and on the websites like Kathy was talking about, but actually changing the degree name that will show up on that student's transcript when they successfully finish our degree. So BSMLS will now show up in our transcripts for our students. And then the last thing I put in there, and I'll talk about this more later, we're also going to go through a ongoing process this coming academic year to change all of our courses from CLS prefixes to MLS prefixes, along with all of those other things that Kathy mentioned, which we've already started, including web-based information and print form information. Next slide, please. Okay, so kind of back to the steps. So as we moved into late fall 2022, this was after I had given this proposal to my dean and others, and it was after we had put in that initial program information management system, this request. It's just a simple portal, just a simple couple of sentences. It wasn't that difficult once we put it in. At this point, the name change proposal also went to our College of Health Professions level. In our Health Professions College, we have something called the College Curriculum Committee. I have a faculty member that represents us on that committee, and then the other 7 programs, nursing and so forth, have members. And so it's an 8-person committee. And my process there was simply to show up alongside my faculty member and give a bit of detail about what we were doing. And so I described the steps. I talked about why this was so important, kind of alongside what I just detailed in that proposal about this movement, about the white papers and the other position papers, and how this movement was occurring and how critical it was to solidify our degree, as well as making it concurrent with the credential, so MLS. And a simple vote followed that. and that was approved. So that was approved at that level. And I'll mention here quickly that there were really no hurdles or roadblocks in my university or my college once I had gathered that data. If you know me, you know I've been talking about this anyway with my dean and other chairs. They're well aware of our struggles in name recognition and awareness. I probably put in 8 to 12 hours over several days. Again, this was over several days to week and a half to kind of put some of this together, the proposal and the information I'd gathered. So it wasn't like a month putting together a thesis, but it required a little time. And then really all 8 units, it was unanimous within our college. So it was a great moment at the college level to have that approved. And then in the spring of 2023, it moved on to something called the University Curriculum Committee, which is at the university level. And they approved the name change at that level. And then it was forwarded to the provost level. Again, that's the upper administration of the president and the provost office. And that also included that name and degree name change. Later in the spring of 23, so we're getting into this current year, the upper administration, again, the provost and the president's cabinet approved it. And then for our state university systems, we have a board of regents. So there's 7 or 8 of the universities within our system, and it went there for approval. Next slide, please. So if you're in a state university system and perhaps even a private university system, you know that there's lots of committee levels, lots of bureaucratic movement. And so this was occurring throughout fall and spring, fall of 22 through the spring of 23 and all the way into this year. So this past summer, I'm happy to announce, and really in August, we found out that it was approved by the Board of Regents. I am literally waiting this week to get the official memo from our provost office that puts it in print, and it's totally official. And so excited about that and really pumped. My faculty are really excited. The students are excited because they know how important this is to us and to them and their future. And so really right now, and even though I'll mention that Kathy had talked about this, we did start some of this early. Even if you don't publish it, right, you can do some of this behind the scenes. So we recreated our handbook. We have a handbook for our students, and we started this back in, I guess, April and May of this past spring. So there are things you can do to prepare along the way. And so we're going to start all that name change with our website, our digital stuff, our social media accounts, our forms, our signage, the catalog, anything and everything that you can think of. And it'll certainly take some time. It's rolling along right now. It will require both my faculty and my administrative assistant to give me a hand here and there because we have different people managing our website. We also anticipate a few weeks of working with our website editor. So that's a university level to kind of check it for any issues on IT requirements. And then so far, we've had no cybersecurity concerns. That was a question some people asked about doing that. And so far, so good. And so we're moving along with that right now. Next slide, please. So here we are in fall of 2023. And literally, I told you about that college curriculum committee. So now that we've got the name change and the degree change approved, this is just how Texas State works and all of our universities in our system. Now we get to submit every course change for our prefix. And so Susan kind of joked with me on an email that, oh my God, this sounds interesting, but it's really not as crazy bad as you might think. But there's a little work, right? So we basically take all of our courses. We have 17 courses in our program. They're all prefixed CLS, and we're basically going to change that to MLS. So for example, I'm teaching right now CLS 3326, medical parasitology. It will be asked to be changed to MLS 3326. And of course, within those documents, there's also other things we have to keep an eye on. So we have to update our bibliography. If you've ever been in a university, you've probably gone through this every so often. You make sure things are up to date. Bibliography, course level objectives, the course description. So we're going to ensure that everywhere that says clinical, if it's necessary, we will make it medical. Occasionally, clinical might fit there for certain named entities on campus or something like that, because we do have clinical coordinators, things like that. But a lot of that will be changed to the new titles. Each of these will be done by splitting this up amongst my faculty. Again, I have a representative on that committee, so she will kind of head that and lead that for us because she knows what the University Curriculum Committee really wants to see. And you want to get that right so that it's kind of a smooth process. You don't have to kind of come back to all those changes. Notice the deadline for us is coming soon. And so we're working on that right now. September 29th, we have to have it inputted into the portal, the Curriculum Committee portal. Next slide. And so that's kind of the process. That's been my journey. It's moving forward, and it's moving forward successfully. I just wanted to mention here that throughout this process, I've had amazing support, not only through the Workforce Steering Committee, but also the Nomenclature Committee. So many people across the country, but also right here in my own program and university that have really helped us gather that information. I also want to mention quickly that I am more than happy to share my experience in journaling on emails with you, or phone call if you're taking this on. Happy to talk about it and give you some support and maybe some help. There's likely going to be some differences, obviously, from state to state due to policies and government. For example, state versus private institutions, or other administrative differences at the college or university level. So your experience may be a little different, but I think this gives us a good blueprint for moving forward. I want to say overall, it's not been difficult. There's been some busy work. I think part of this was that I and my faculty have been on board with this for actually many years, and it just came to a head in the past couple of years. And really the pandemic as well pushed this forward because everybody knows who we are now with respect to how much we've been doing on our own university with respect to testing and informing our upper administration. So it takes a little time, it takes some effort and attention to detail, but who better to do that than medical lab scientists, right? We know how to get it done. So that extra workload is absolutely worth it. It hasn't been overwhelming, and we've helped split it up, and we're going to get it done this fall. Next slide, please. So this is that resource slide again. I'm just leaving this here to remind you that this might be a good document to grab, this slide to hang on your wall, or to even share it with your faculty members or others that might want to kind of see the big picture so that they don't get, really worried about getting down in the weeds right away. And then it's just a process, if you're the leader, of just lining up some of these dates and tasks and just helping push this forward with that paperwork and that proposal and things like that. Again, I am here to help if you need it. Next slide, please. Resources. Cannot overemphasize the importance of these resources. I've used them many times throughout my career, whether it's ASCLS, ASCP, listservs for educators, NACLs, Bureau of Labor and Statistics. We need to work on the Bureau of Labor and Statistics to get titles fixed there as well. So there's plenty of work to go around, but we can all lock arms and get this done. Next slide. And thanks to my Workforce Steering Committee. There's probably so many others that I could point out, but these are, to my knowledge, the Workforce Steering Committee that I've been a part of, and I want to thank all of my colleagues. This is a collective effort. Thank you so much. I believe the next slide might be transitioning, and I look forward to working with all of you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Dr. Rohde. That was a great presentation. We really appreciate all the detail you've included there in your process, and just thank you for going through the process and being willing to share that with us. Our next speaker is from the ASCP Board of Certification. Susan Johnson is the Director of Clinical Education and the Specialist in Blood Banking at the program at Versity, and she's the Director of the Transfusion Medicine Program at Marquette University. Sue has served on the board of the AABB and is past chair of the ASCP Board of Certification and currently chairs the Nomenclature Task Force. She is an associate editor of the AABB Technical Manual and author of several books on the topic of immunohematology. Sue, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Susan. So next slide, please. So as Susan said, I'm representing the role that the ASC Board of Certification has played in really coming to one identity for us, right? And I am an MLS. And our goal, right, is to provide excellence in certification of lab professionals on behalf of patients worldwide. And certification, of course, has a huge role in our identity. Next slide, please. So just briefly thanking this amazing group of individuals that I've been able to work with on the nomenclature task force. And you'll note that we all have our MLS. If we were MT, we are now MLS noted. And these individuals from the Board of Certification, from the ASCLS, from CLMA, we have an HR professional. So for everybody that's been involved, it's been a broad view. And I'd like to really thank all of them. Next slide. So our journey with the transition of MT to MLS actually started before 2019. There were conversations occurring from the Board of Certification side as well as with the ASCLS side, but we really met to solidify that in June of 2019 when we met with Jim Flanagan and the current president at the time, Kathy Johnson of ASCLS, and then myself and our executive director, Pat Tanabe at the time. And we really agreed, it said we need to do something. We need to unify our voice. And so that position paper that Linda and Kathy talked about was approved. Lots of work went into that, but that was approved in October of 2020 by the Board of Certification and ASCLS by the time all the approvals came. And that really was the starting point of, okay, we're working towards this. And then in December of 2020 was actually the first meeting of the nomenclature task force to say, okay, now how are we going to really implement this? How do we really make this change sustainable? And so over the course of about a year, the second document came out which was super important, and that is promoting the medical lab science profession through standardized titles. That was approved by, again, ASCLS board and the ASCP board. But in addition, we also had sign-on from all the participating partners of the Board of Certification. We had AMT, we had AABB, for example, from my view of the world, but everybody in support of this opportunity. Next slide, please. So in October of 2021, it was really time to now make that transition, right? So the Board of Governors approved the MT to MLS transition. So all MTs would now become officially recognized as MLS. At the same time, the BOG approved the change of cytotechnologist to cytologist. So the nomenclature committee started with medical laboratory science, but has gone to be much bigger than that. Last year, we focused mostly on the FAQs. Also launched the I Am MLS campaign. That was launched actually at the ASCP 100th year anniversary last year in Chicago. This has had lots of energy around it. It's been really exciting to see. I'll share the website in the next slide. Not quite. But that, as I mentioned, that promoting medical lab science profession paper through standardized titles, we got that support from all our partner societies. Everybody agreed this is the way to go. And most importantly, from the Board of Certification side, notification to all current MTs that the BOC had contact information for went out. And it's difficult to reach everybody, at least with an email. So there were also newsletter articles, critical values, the BOC newsletter, social media. So not everybody probably personally got contacted, but everybody should know their certification is now MLS. And then this year we've been working on our job description templates. So from that paper, Promoting the Lab Science Profession, one of the things that we really worked on a lot and thought about a lot, and we had wonderful conversations about thinking about the individuals that work in the laboratory with a 4-year degree that performed laboratory testing. And in that conversation, we also kept in mind what the CLIA requirements are for high complexity testing, and thought about the struggles in workforce, and knowing that many individuals are working in the field performing testing that are not certified medical laboratory scientists and doing a wonderful job. So at this point, actually, I'll call her Kathy Doig because she was great in challenging our thinking, and in a good way, Kathy. And we really thought about, we're all medical laboratory scientists, whether we're certified or not. And from that point, we thought about it a lot, and I could tell you, all of us that are certified MLS were like, okay, and got comfortable with it. And really, in that paper that's listed here, it really defines anybody that has that biology or baccalaureate degree in the sciences would be is a medical laboratory scientist. And the differentiation, we would highly encourage that, of course, is the certification. And that's where, if you read the paper, you'll see that you could designate that perhaps on a name badge as CMLS, a Certified Medical Laboratory Scientist. So to that point then, we've been working on job descriptions to define and to be able to differentiate template job descriptions to differentiate the medical laboratory scientist, encouraging certification, and then the medical laboratory technician. So those two job templates are about finalized, putting the finishing touches on those, and they'll be posted on the BOC website as well as the ASCLS website. So we'll get it in many places as possible. Next slide, please. Yep. Thank you. And here's the Take the MLS pledge. I'd encourage you all to do this. It's very simple. Here's the link, there's a QR code, and the paper that I'm talking about is listed here with the link. And basically it's, checking off. I will refer to myself as a medical laboratory scientist. I will refer to my colleagues as medical laboratory scientists. And that's probably the hardest thing to change. Like personally, I've caught myself, because tech was so easy to say, right? But we're medical laboratory scientists. And another piece of it is work with your managers, your program directors, your human resource professionals to change those names, to acknowledge it, and then tell somebody about how great we are as medical laboratory scientists. So I encourage you to do it. It's really quick and easy. Next slide, please. This just lists all the documents that we've talked about today, and all the links for those documents, and they are on ASCLS and the ASCP BOC website. Next slide. And then what's next for us, we're going to finalize the templates so that those are out there for people to use for job descriptions. Obviously every organization needs to make it their own, but hopefully these will help. We are working on toolkits for communication to our various medical lab science stakeholders. We're going to be tackling the categorical certifications. So currently it says technologist in, for example, blood banking. So that is on our list to take on. We're going to continue to work with the licensure states that have clinical lab as their official certification name. And then we're just going to continue to communicate. Our HR professional is going to help us to get to the HR professionals of the world, right? To get out communication. But we all need to do that as well. We're going to continue to work with all of the associations and organizations that medical laboratory scientists are part of, our journals, our association newsletters, industry, media, general media, we know we have a huge list, but it all starts with each of us. And so I thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you all today. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. We really appreciate that perspective from the Board of Certification. And, I appreciate the perspective as well that this is not a short-term thing. We didn't get this mixed up in a few years, and it'll take some time to align and have everybody using the medical laboratory science nomenclature. So I do appreciate your sort of outlining the other steps that we all collectively as the laboratory professional community need to take. So next we'll hear from Marissa James from the National Accrediting Agency for Clinical Laboratory Sciences. Marissa has been the Chief Executive Officer of the NACLS since July of 2022. She was a hospital MLS program director for nearly 20 years, and she's a former NACLS board member, secretary, and vice president. Thanks for joining us, Marissa.
Very good. It's a pleasure to be here today. I've seen a lot of chats. I've seen a lot of Q&A. And so hopefully I can help you kind of get on board with aligning yourself with some of the ideas that we have for the titles. But also I'm going to give you a little bit of information about where NACLS is coming from and kind of their role in the nomenclature change. So if we can get to the next slide, the first thing I want to point out is our mission statement for NACLS. And so the mission is, if you notice, it's the National Accrediting Agency for Clinical Laboratory Sciences. And I noticed a lot of chatter about, hey, why aren't we changing to, NAMLS or ASMLS? But clinical laboratory science is actually the umbrella term that we are using for all of the disciplines in the laboratory. So that includes our histology friends, our phlebotomy friends, all of those different disciplines. We have 12 within NACLS. And so that's kind of the umbrella term. You'll also notice that we're committed to being the premier accreditation agency for ensuring the advancement of education in the clinical laboratory sciences and related healthcare disciplines provided by both domestic and international programs. And that we'll kind of touch on a little bit later. And our logo, it is our 50th year of existence since 1973. So we've been doing some extra celebrations. So you can go to the next slide now. And this is our vision and our values. And as a in the NACLS world, we want our laboratories and people who hire graduates to be from the NACLS programs because they see us as being high quality, innovative, they're safe for the healthcare consumers, and they're of high value. So you'll see a lot of those same values tailored into our vision. We are recognized by what we call CHIA, and this is the Council for Higher Education Accreditation. So they are our accreditors. And we are an active member with another organization that has a bunch of different accreditors in the specialized or professional world. So that's, instead of being an institutional accreditor, these are, they have social work accreditors and nutrition accreditors. And we're a part of that organization. So we can kind of get a pulse of what's going on around us. So next slide, please. I wanted to share those 12 disciplines with you, the different accreditation pathways that include the clinical laboratory sciences. And there's a couple that are newer. So medical laboratory microbiologists and public health microbiologists are also newly accreditation pathways. And you can go to the next slide. I threw in my bio. Susan did tell you a little bit about me. But if you look at the fourth bullet, I have a visceral reaction when MLSs refer to themselves as medtechs or techs or something along those lines. So back when I became a program director, I had the title MT. ASCP. And so I had decided when I was the hospital-based program director, I decided I was going to be a voluntary participant of the ASCP's credential maintenance program so that I could use the same credential as my students who are graduating at the time. And it does take a lot of practice, but sometimes for short, I'll just say scientist, and it's only one extra syllable past med tech. So you can do it. I also put some information for the NACLS LinkedIn profile as well as my own personal profile. So you can advance to the next slide, please. So the role of accreditors obviously is to have standards, and it is basically the public's seal of approval for these programs that students go through. It's quality, high quality education, and it just tells the public you have to meet certain requirements for, faculty, for your resources, for your publications, and it's just to assure public quality in laboratory science education. The next slide. All right, so this is where things get very exciting. We have a standards revision. So the last standards that NACLS had was unveiled back in 2012. It's been 10 years, believe it or not. So last year it was time to go through a new standard revision. And there were a lot of different charges to update the standards. And one of them was to look at standardizing the nomenclature. And so the standards review task force, there were 16 volunteers, 3 staff members that were a part of this. And we had a group of individuals within that task force that really wanted NACLS to require MLS and MLT as part of a standard change. And so there were 2 proposed standards relevant to that changing nomenclature. And they were in Standard 1 and in Standard 7. And if you're not familiar with NACLS standards, 1 through 6 are core standards, meaning they are the same for medical laboratory science, medical laboratory assisting, or histology. They are the same. It's 7 and 8 that have the specific pathway differences in terms of maybe it's MLT, HTL, whatever the case may be. So next slide. I bring this slide up to kind of preface who is NACLS? Well, that big light blue chunk of that pie graph, that's probably the piece of pie that I would want to eat. That's the 405 reviewers that we have. So that's us. That's the laboratory educators within the laboratory community. And there's a little tiny piece of pie that's the staff, a little bit bigger. There's 13 board of directors, and there are 39 review committee members and 10 staff. And so this group is NACLS. That is your profession. And so when you think about that, when you think about NACLS, it's your peers. Okay. So the next slide. We're going to kind of dissect those 2 different standard changes that the NACLS Standards Revision Task Force looked at. And the Standard 1 is the responsibilities of the sponsor. So that could be a hospital or a university, even a public health laboratory. And the standard says you have to ensure the name of the program is in accordance with unique standards for each accredited program type when applicable. See Standard 7. The unique standard proposal. I need to add these are proposed. These are not final. These are proposed. So don't panic. But then the unique standards, it put in both MLS and MLT that it needs to be, either medical laboratory science, medical laboratory sciences, technician, technology for the MLT pathway. So the next slide. What ends up happening when you go through this standards revision is you do have to take this to public comment. And so we did that back in May. One of the things the task force was very strongly why they decided to go with these two is they really wanted professional identity to basically be a requirement for NAACLS accredited programs. It would help facilitate changes within the institutions who need to see a standard change if they're going to go through that whole name change process, as Dr. Rohde went through. They did also discuss state licensure titles and wanted to just, figure out a way to keep those two requirements in there for just professional identity, even if there would be a difference in the name of the license. And they also did discuss some sort of a phase-in process. So if we go to the next slide, we will really get excited about some of the public comments. And so in May of 2023, and if you went back to the NAACLS website, you could probably see those proposed standards. Remember, those are proposed standards. They are not final at this moment, but we did send them out with all of the changes. They were sent out for public comment. And in those two different standards, there were comments that were for and against. And the next couple of slides are very wordy. And if you advance to the next slide, later on, if you really want to dive into what these slides say, you will get a copy of the presentation with the slides and everything, so you can look at all of these pros and cons if you would like to. I just highlighted some of the big things. So it would help get university support to change the name. These are the people in favor. Profession, unity of the profession, standardization might take time, but it's worth it. Professional identity, love this, that kind of thing. So lots of what we've already heard today. On the flip side, if you go to the next slide, unfortunately, we have lots and lots and lots of words. We've got a lot of folks talking, and I've seen this in the chat even today. Bureaucracy, hurdles, the licensure, even the last bullet, meaningless, since the title of a program has absolutely no impact on a position title given by an employer. So that's really kind of getting, what that's telling me is get into your HR departments first. Next slide. Needlessly prescriptive. I don't know if you noticed in our values, NAACLS is big on innovation. We do not like cookie cutter approaches. We want everyone to build their program for what works for them as long as their outcomes are good. There is fear that it will not impact the quality of education. And it begs the question, does the name of a program, does that impact the quality of education? Will this harm? Will it have the intended impact we want it to? Or will this cause harm to programs? State regulations, college regulations, those are some frustrations that may pop up. And then, is this just a United States initiative? Mission for NAACLS does involve international accreditation. And so there are programs outside of the United States that use a different verbiage that is basically the same as medical laboratory science. For example, I believe Japan uses medical technology. And on the next slide, I think you'll see Puerto Rico, maybe it's on the following slide, but Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, and by law, their name is medical technology as well. And so there's other programs that have CLS. They've used CLS. They've promoted it. It's going to be hard to undo all of that. Changes take years. Some of the Bachelor of Science degrees are more generic with maybe different options or for the different degrees that you might have. Maybe there's radiology in the BS in health sciences as well as medical laboratory science, and those are just emphasis. Next slide. Here's the Puerto Rico. We had lots of our Puerto Rico friends who reached out to let us know that this is a law that would have to be changed. And also bringing up some of the economic impacts, reprinting costs, changing websites, all of those different things. And then also in your medical laboratory science programs, are you preparing them for a broader job, I guess? You can go work at, a Cerner and do the information technology. So there's a lot of opposition. Many of you have said that in the chat and on the Q&A. So the next slide. So in summation, our pros and cons from an ACLS perspective. The pros are standardization, professional identity, unification. As a medical laboratory scientist myself, I love the idea of one nomenclature. But the cons from an ACLS CEO perspective, is this prescriptive if you wanted to change your name of your program, or if it was required? Licensure laws per state or your territory, international nomenclature, and then, of course, the difficulties in changing names at the college and university level. The other con from an ACLS perspective is if this were a standard change, that would mean that programs would not be in compliance on a standard, which would mean a 10-year award would drop to a 5-year award, which is that a direction we want to go with that? And so if you go to the next slide, ultimately, what's happening is at the next stage is the NACLS Board of Directors will have the final say on those proposed standards. And the board is a supporter of standardizing the professional title. It's just a matter of whether or not it should be a required standard. And so that's, they're going to discuss this in a couple of weeks. And so I know a lot of our board members are online today, listening to this webinar because they want to hear, the pros and the cons of this. And so I really wanted to show you what NACLS is trying to do, what our volunteers gave as proposed standards. And that's what I got today. So maybe it's time for the Q&A.
Okay, thank you so much, Marissa. Lot of important information there about what's up and coming with NACLS, or maybe up and coming. And thank you so much for taking a stand for medical laboratory science nomenclature. So I'll invite all of our presenters to come back on open their mics or I guess open their video. We'll keep ourselves muted unless we're talking, I think. But at least we can see your faces. So we'll enter our Q&A time now. We have about 16 minutes left for questions, and quite a few questions in the Q&A box. If you have other questions, enter them here. I don't think we'll get to all 30 today, although there's overlap with some of them. But I guess I would say that, that we have stakeholders on this call, and that these questions are all certainly being considered. And if we don't get your answer today, we just want to thank you for it in advance. So the first question in the chat is about any discussion regarding histotechnician and histotechnologist titles. And there's something related to that as well. That medical laboratory science is an umbrella term for all medical laboratory professions: medical laboratory scientists, cytotechnologists, histotechnologists, and path assistants. So the person finds this a little bit confusing. So I guess I wondered if maybe Sue Johnson would start with this one. Is there any conversation with the Board of Certification with respect to other certification titles? And how should we be thinking about some of these other groups in relation to MLS?
Right. That's a great question. It's definitely a question that we've also been entertaining. So for the example of histotechnology, histotechnologists, that is on our list of individuals to, be thinking about and reaching out to, because part of the BOC is the, make sure I have all the acronyms, the Yeah, I had the right acronym. I see Susan shaking her head.
NSH,
The
National
NSH,
Society
thank
for
you.
Histotechnology.
Exactly. They're one of our partners on the Board of Certification, Board of Governors. So we will definitely be having conversations with them as well. So that's on our list on the Nomenclature Task Force list of opportunities. And in terms of, the broader term medical laboratory science, I we looked at that as well, right? And so much, you could say the opposite, right? Like the CLS, clinical laboratory science, is the broader term. And if we think about it in that way, right, ASCLS, NACLS, right? Like that is the broader term of our professional organizations. So I think that really did help kind of direct us towards medical laboratory science as our profession, for the individuals that do the work, do the testing in the lab. The
Do any
day-to-day
other,
anyway.
oh, sorry. Do
Sorry,
any
no,
other
go ahead.
panelists have a comment?
I would just like to say also that they fall under the very broad term of medical laboratory professional. So we also need to look at that when we look at the entire scope of specialization within the laboratory, because we are quite specialized. So medical laboratory professional is another term that really could be used in this to be the umbrella for histotech, cytology, and all of that. So that's also something that's just been talked about.
Right. And I guess just to firm up what Sue was saying, that at this time, there's not any effort to change histotechnologist or pathologist assistant or cytologist to anything else. The real focus here is to align the people who are sort of have the laboratory generalist education and certification under MLS, because that's what we felt was the most confused. Okay. There are other questions in the chat related to licensure. And I know this is a difficult issue. What do you suggest states with licensure requirements? What might we do, I think, to align nomenclature for states with licensure? Many are CLS. I think some are MLS and perhaps other terms as well. What are the thoughts about that? Maybe Kathy or Sue?
I'll take a stab. One of the things that I think we can do is we can keep some things separate. And for sure, if you're in a licensed state that licenses you as a clinical laboratory scientist or a clinical laboratory technologist, any instance that refers to your license will use that terminology. You don't change that until the state changes that. And in fact, you may know that physician assistants are changing their name to physician associate, and that's the advice that they are giving their members, because you don't want to be in violation of the law in any way. On the other hand, your casual conversation with friends does not have to use that. You can begin the change that way, and then you can also become active and advocate for the state to change the name in the license. Not an easy thing to do. I don't mean to suggest it is. It's going to take devoted individuals to work within their state legislatures to get that changed. But ultimately, even the pathology assistants, now becoming pathology associates, are looking at that very long-term process of working through the licensing boards to get that changed. So I would say keep the licensed part separate from just your regular usage of referring to your profession, and you can make the change there.
Would anybody else like to comment? I think that's great advice, Kathy. I think, as we align the profession behind MLS, it might be easier to approach state legislatures at that point. But until we're united, I think it's more difficult. Okay. So what are some suggestions for how to get industry and other partners to make the change in their literature and their marketing materials? Sue mentioned this a little bit in her talk as things down the road. So what should we be doing? Go ahead, Sue, please.
All right, I'll jump in. Well, so one of the things that anybody could do, right? If you're part of an association, I actually just finished writing a letter to the editor to Immunohematology. That's the journal that the specialists in blood banking individuals read, and it's going to be devoted to SBBs. And the first letter is going to all be about what we're doing around our professional identity and being medical laboratory scientists. So anybody can do that, right? You write a letter and kind of explain it. And if anybody wants more information, it's all on the website, or we're all open to emails, questions, whatever it might be. We also will specifically go to, or putting together these toolkits, as I mentioned, a little bit different for people that are in the media, the news, than would be perhaps for the professional societies who all have newsletters, right? Or educational opportunities and things. So we're also working on putting that together. But it will take all of us, no doubt.
Would anyone else like to comment?
Well, yeah.
Linda,
I would just make the comment that anybody that goes to work in industry, they have a vested interest in what they're called. And so these individuals that are in industry, and many of our long-term members that are in industry, can begin to make that change there. They can talk with their hiring individuals because they are there and they understand. And the fact that MT is no longer a credential and that it is MLS should help, at least help facilitate that change on industry's part also.
Great. So one of the comments in the NAACL's verbatims was about fees associated with a university changing from CLS or MT to MLS. Dr. Rohde, can you comment on that? Were there fees, or are the expenses sort of hidden in your time and that type of effort?
With respect to changing my program name and the degree name? Yeah, nothing that I've seen. Again, this is the Texas State University system that I'm working within, so there may be differences, but we had no issues with this. The one thing that did come up in the conversation in the Q&A that made me kind of give it a little bit of thought was if NAACL's did make some type of change where you were in violation, for instance, of a standard or something. So, that being said, I think that typically there really wasn't any hidden costs. Now, we've really gone away from paper and those sorts of things. So most of our changes are digital based. I mean, we still have a few flyers, we still do a few things that we might have some paper, but it's really not a burden with respect to paper or other costs. It's really a time. It's really a time commitment, and it wasn't crazy for us. It was a matter of lining it up and following. I think most people are like any of us as students. It's a change. And even I was concerned about this, like, oh my God, that's going to take me forever. It really wasn't that bad. It was mainly just getting my head around it, putting things in order, and rolling forward. It's been check the box, move forward, just like a scientist does. And so in many ways, it's been very much an easy process. It's just been, for bureaucracy, a little lengthy. And so that's part of the stamina that you all have to understand when you start that process.
Thank you. So what's your estimation for how long the whole thing will take?
Completely done, it's going to be 2 full academic years. But the biggest bulk was in this first year, getting that approval, getting the program name change and the degree change, because I cannot tell you how excited our current seniors are that it's going to be on their transcripts and their diplomas. They are bouncing around like crazy. They've changed their society name, and so they're moving forward even faster than my program can do. The curriculum, welcome to bureaucracy, right? It's going to take a full academic year to get that through every committee, but next fall, everything will be MLS coursework.
Okay.
So probably 2 years at our institution, maybe shorter at other institutions. And
Okay.
hospital-based programs might be even more rapid. Maybe they have quicker triggers to get things done than bureaucracy at the state level.
And we chose to focus this program on university because we know there is more bureaucracy there. Not that there's none in a hospital,
Right,
but
right.
it's certainly not as extensive. Okay, so patience, right? That's what you're saying. We need to have a little bit of patience with this name change. Marissa, from the NACL's perspective, once Dr. Rohde changes his name, does he need to notify NACL's about that, or anything related to that?
He would
Am I
notify
officially
NACLS.
notifying you today,
Yeah,
Marissa?
right. Well, probably an email would be good. But I mean, there really is no, as far as fees or anything like that, we don't have any change fees at this time for anything like that. And what I was gonna chime in with, since I'm a former hospital-based program director, I think that I was program director with 3 different names. And so I was in a standalone hospital, and when I took over, it was medical technology, and then I changed it to clinical laboratory science, and then I changed it to medical laboratory science. And so, so there's a lot less hoops to jump through, particularly if you have a standalone hospital. The hardest part was HR. Honestly, if you're in a hospital, you can just start with your human resources department and make sure that because as the industry partners come into those hospital environments and they see your name tag and they see MLS after your name, then they'll realize what they're dealing with. If it's just part of your vernacular to use MLS, it does catch on, albeit it takes a while, but it does catch on, particularly if you hire lots of new graduates. They want to use the MLS. So lots of time and patience with the C.
So there's a couple of comments in the chat about can MT graduates use the MLS title? So just to review that one more time, Kathy, can you go over that again for us?
Well, when you say MT graduates, if they're so to me, here's how it works. If you graduate from a program and they give you a degree in medical technology, that's going to be your degree title name on your resume forever, because that's the title that the institution gave you. But you're going to take a certification exam from the Board of Certification that will make your credential title medical laboratory science. So once again, it's keeping those things separate. But if you are eligible for the MLS exam, then you will use the MLS credential once you have passed it. Do you think that answered that question, Susan?
Yeah, I think so. Like you can still call yourself a medical laboratory
That's right.
scientist. Your job title might be medical laboratory scientist. I hope it will be. But your degree from your university might be medical technologist or clinical laboratory scientist. And that's also why it's important for us to get this changed at the academic level. Rodney, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, just briefly. In many ways, just like when we've changed we've dropped courses over the time I've been here in 20 years. And in many ways in a university setting, something that students and perhaps alumni don't understand is that when you drop, we used to have a computer course in clinical lab science. We changed that, we dropped it because we use them in everything now. We don't really need a dedicated course. And so when you do those things, you have to create a process in your university at my level that says that course equates with this course or it's no longer required. And so in many instances, I think even at the degree level, if you graduated with a medical technology degree, we had that name way before I was here in the 70s and early 80s. Our degree is now synonymous with medical lab science. So you, I think, personally could change it on your resume. You certainly could put some kind of note that says that it's changed. But I mean, in my perspective, I would change it because the current status is changed unless you have some reason in state licensure or elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Kathy.
So, Rodney, you were anticipating what I was thinking about further on this. If the program title, this is what you said, it was medical technology, now it's CLS. So someone who was one of your MT grads could call it CLS and could go formerly medical technology. Or they could do something like my degrees in medical technology, now clinical laboratory science, showing that there was that change. I was thinking in my original answer that it wasn't a program that had yet made a change. It's medical technology now, so that's what you're going to have on your resume until they make a change, and then you could adjust it as you suggested.
So to be respectful of everyone's time, I want to thank everyone for joining us.